Thank you very much. Thank everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. Today I want to give this talk. I'm talking about resentment and blame. I'm standing here as a philosopher because I studied philosophy, but I'm also standing here as the daughter of a dairy farmer, and therefore quite familiar with feeling resentment and blame towards Carnists. So I want to ask you a question. Who of you here thinks meat eating is wrong? So everyone, right? Okay, and morally wrong, right? And who of you here believes that it is more effective to approach meat eaters in a non-judgmental, friendly, calm way? Okay, so I think that's also everyone. Okay, great, because I also believe both of those things. But those things, they create friction, right? If we want to be non-judgmental and calm towards someone, that person is doing something that we believe is wrong, it's very hard to not blame them and not resent them. And I struggled with that a lot. I'm now vegan for almost 2 years. Last year when I was here, I just had a huge fight with my father. When I became vegan and broke through that wall of speciesism, you could say, it was very hard for me to relate to my family. It was very hard to, first of all, I realized that I felt like I've been lied to all my life, so that was very hard. But it was also very hard that my family was still continuing not only to eat meat, but to actively enslave and exploit animals, the animals that I cared about. So that was really a struggle, and what really helped me was philosophy. So I want to share you in particular an argument that really helped me to function in this world, but also to have a great relationship with my family, and in particular my father, but also my other family members, because it's not only my father who's a dairy farmer, but also both of my parents are raised on dairy farms, so also lots of uncles, actually 5 of my other family members are also dairy farmers. So I'm from a family of dairy farmers, of generations and generations. So that was something I had to deal with, and philosophy helped me. So first, I want to explain the specific argument that really helped me to deal with this resentment and feelings of, and blaming actually my family members. And then I want to talk a bit more about how it I practically applied it in my situation and how it maybe can help you, hopefully. Because I think, of course, most of us aren't raised on a dairy farm or from a family of dairy farmers, but I think all of us experience resentment and are struggling with blaming Carnists and blaming those who are close to us who still participate in Carnism. Okay. So, this argument I'm explaining is developed by Gideon Rosen. He's a philosopher, and he mainly talks about the importance of ignorance when we do immoral things. So I want to assume, and I think there's no problem with assuming, that we all have freedom of choice. So I can do whatever I want, but I can also do whatever I don't want. I am free for example, I'm vegan now, I hold vegan values, but I'm free to go to a burger bar and order a vegan burger, non-vegan burger there, to order a meat burger there. So, for example, imagine that I would do that. Imagine I would go to a restaurant and as a vegan, order a meat burger and eat that. Well, in that moment, like we all established, I'm doing something wrong, right? And maybe you can say that I am to blame for that, because I'm doing this knowingly, willingly. I know that meat and eat is wrong, I know of all the animals suffering, and I do it anyway. So you could say in that case, I am responsible and I'm to blame, and I would say that I would be originally responsible for Act A, buying a meat burger. Okay, and this original responsibility is important because I will use this concept later on, and I will explain more thoroughly what it actually means. Okay, so in this case I would be to blame for buying a meat burger. Now imagine me going to a restaurant and I would ask, to a burger bar again, and I would ask do you have a vegan burger? And they say, yes, we do. And they give me a burger. Maybe I specify what vegan means, you know, so really make clear that they know what vegan means. They give me a burger, but actually that burger is a meat burger. I haven't tasted meat for a very long time, don't know really how it tastes, don't know how to separate it from don't know how to recognize it from some of the really good fake meats that are on the market. So I think that I'm eating a vegan burger, but actually I'm eating meat. In that case, I'm doing the same thing, buying a meat burger, although it's questionable whether I'm to blame for that. I think most people would say that I'm not to blame for that. And why is that? Because I'm ignorant about it being a meat burger. If I wasn't ignorant, I wouldn't have bought that burger, I wouldn't have ate that burger. So that ignorance makes me do that wrongful thing. And then the question becomes, well, are you always... So then, because that ignorance makes me do that wrongful thing, I'm not to blame, I'm excused. I'm excused for doing a wrong thing. However, the question becomes, am I always excused because of ignorance? Well, maybe not always, right? Maybe you would sometimes say ignorance can be culpable ignorance. For example, if you could have known that it was a meat burger. In this case, I think I could have known if I, for example, would go to a laboratory and got it tested, whether it was vegan or whether it was meat. It's not really reasonable to expect me to do that, right? So I did all the things that were reasonable to expect of me to do. I asked, is it vegan? I explained maybe what vegan means. And still, I'm ignorant. So that makes the ignorance non-culpable. I did everything that was reasonably expected from me to inform myself about that burger. So I hope you are still following me and understand why this ignorance excuses me. Now imagine a different scenario. I go to Burger Bar, again, and I see on the menu that they're selling a veggie burger. I think, oh, veggie burger, that means that that burger is made out of vegetables. So I order the veggie burger. However, this particular restaurant knows nothing about veganism or vegetarianism. So with veggie burger, they just mean a meat burger with lots of extra vegetables on the side. Something like that. So in this case, it becomes less clear whether this ignorance was culpable or not. I can't decide to change what I believe. It is still true that if I weren't ignorant, I wouldn't have eaten the meat burger. But in this case, you could say that it was reasonable to expect from me that I would do something to prevent the ignorance. So in this case, you could say, well, actually, you had an obligation to ask what was in the burger, and you didn't do it, and therefore, you are derivatively responsible. So let me explain what that means. So responsibility for an act, for example, Act A, must be either derivative or original. So either you are excused for something, if you do something wrong, or you are derivatively or original responsible. So in this case, I would be, if we would say that I was responsible for not asking what is in the burger, I would be derivative responsible for Act A, for buying the meat burger. So I would be to blame because I am responsible for, original responsible for Act B. Right? Okay. Derivative responsibility presupposes original responsibility. So this means that if you're derivative responsible for something, you have to be original responsible for some sort of act that partially caused the act that you're derivative responsible for. So you can't be, like, imagine that you are derivative responsible for Act A and also derivative responsible for Act B, and then derivative responsible till infinite acts. That's not possible. There has to be original responsibility somewhere in the chain of events, right? So it could also be an act C, but it has to be an act that you are originally responsible for. Okay, so someone's responsibility for act A is derivative if he is responsible for an act B, or C, or D, or E, which originated and partially caused act A. Okay. So if we assume this, now let's go to the carnist who buys a meat burger, right? The carnist knows that it's meat, but he or she still might be ignorant about all the animal suffering that was going on for the production of that meat burger. And if that carnist wasn't ignorant about all that animal suffering, he or she wouldn't have bought that meat burger, right? But then we would of course say, okay, but you should inform yourselves. They should know about all that animal suffering. As a proper citizen, world citizen, you have an obligation to inform yourself so you can make the right moral decisions. Okay? And I think this is fair to say as well. And Rosen calls this, the philosopher who created this, who made this argument, he calls this epistemic procedural obligations. So we have certain obligations to inform ourselves so we can make the right moral decisions, right? So if a carnist buys a meat burger, and he does it because of ignorance, you could say that carnist failed to meet his epistemic procedural obligations. He failed to watch Earthlings or to do anything to inform himself about where his meat comes from. Okay, so now let's continue with the next slide. Okay, so if you do an immoral act A, right, it could be that you are originally responsible for that, right? In most cases, I would say you are not, and I will explain later why that is very rare. So most cases, there is some ignorance which partially causes you to act in an immoral way. Okay, if you acted out of ignorance, then either that ignorance is not to blame for example, when I ask, can I have a vegan burger and they give me a meat burger, then I would be excused, because it's not reasonable for me to do any more research. But sometimes you could say, well, it was reasonable to expect that you do some more research, so you failed to meet your epistemic procedural obligations. Then it's of course the case, okay, I failed to meet those criteria, but why did I fail to meet those criteria? Am I originally responsible for that? Because if I'm not originally responsible for that, I can't be originally responsible for Act A. So maybe I am, but maybe I wasn't aware that I had those obligations. Was I aware of the duty to inform myself? Or did I just not inform myself because I didn't know I had such a duty? So maybe Act B was also done out of ignorance. I think this is actually more likely. So that could be non-culpable ignorance. Could also be because I failed to meet those epistemic procedural obligations. For example, I failed to give myself good moral education about the importance of being an informed citizen. You know what I mean? So, and then you can see again, okay, am I then originally responsible for Act C? Or did I do that also partially out of ignorance? And I hope that now you're starting to see that it's very difficult to locate in this chain of events, to locate original responsibility. So if you want to do that, how does original responsibility actually look like? Well, original responsibility looks like this. Agent E is originally responsible for Act X if the agent is aware of all the empirical and moral informations that make X wrong. I is aware that all things considered, he should not do X. I does X anyway. So, for example, I am a carnist. I am totally aware of all the animal suffering that's going on, but I truly believe that my pleasure, my taste buds, that experience is more important then that animal suffering. If I truly believe that, that is ignorance as well. So if I then decide to buy the meat burger, because I prefer my own taste buds over the lives of other animals, you can't say that I am originally responsible for that act. Maybe I would be derivative responsible, but because of that large part of ignorance, you can't say that I'm originally responsible. And then, so if you see this, you see that this very rarely happens. One is only originally responsible if one acts contrary to what one believes that one should do. So it could happen, but I think it's rare. But even if it isn't rare, it is very hard to distinguish this kind of act that one is originally responsible for, or ordinary moments of doubt. For example, a meat eater that just wants to go vegan, he really believes that eating meat is wrong, but at the last moment he thinks, oh, but just this one time. You know? That's just an ordinary moment of doubt, and that ignorance that just this one time is morally okay. It is not, but he believes that, is a form of ignorance, and, well, it makes it very hard to see if that ignorance was caused by a moment of original responsibility. So the conclusion of this is not that original responsibility doesn't exist. The conclusion of this is also not that people are never to blame. However, it is impossible to exclude the possibility that an act was done out of non-culpable ignorance. So although it could be that people are to blame and responsible for everything, we as humans who do not have access to other humans' brains and other people's motivations, it is impossible, philosophy speaking, to exclude the possibility that anything was done out of non-culpable ignorance. And therefore, it is unjustified to ascribe a positive judgment of blame. Maybe if you are God, or if you are like a super psychologist, you can see why someone does something and if there is original responsibility. But as humans, it is just, I think this argument makes very clear that we just aren't justified to say, okay, you are blameworthy. Okay, so, okay, what about this argument, right? When I discovered this argument, it wasn't like, oh, it's unjustified to blame anyone, so now I'm never going to blame anyone, and anger disappeared and resentment disappeared. No, unfortunately, that didn't happen to me, but it did really help me in my daily life also to realize how much is just done out of ignorance, and to realize that actually wrongful deeds are mostly caused by ignorance, and it's more logical to assume that they're done out of ignorance than that they're done out of anything else. And I want to show you a picture that I think illustrates a bit how our beliefs control what we do and what we think. Okay, so this is a very familiar image for me. If I look at this now, I see a baby taken away from his mother. I see a baby alone. I see a moral crime. I see an injustice. However, I think 5 years ago, I saw a calf in a clean hutch, enjoying the sun, being fed twice a day, being cared for. And those two perspectives aren't equal, but how is it reasonable to expect me to do anything else if, like, that first perspective is what I see and is what I believe? I don't think it is. And being in that position, believing that this calf had an okay life, was cared for properly, and nothing unjustified was going on there, if someone would have told me, this is a crime, this is immoral, you cannot do this, I would think, what a bullshit are you telling me? I I'm pretty sure that 5 years ago I would immediately dismiss that information as bullshit. And, you know, I think that wouldn't have been right to do, but it is also not fair, I think, from the perspective of that person who believes that, from my perspective at that point, to expect anything else. Because, like, we get lots of information every day. In this information society, we need to judge a lot of information as bullshit. We can't take all the information that comes in, we can't consider it as possibly true all the time. We would be thinking and not doing anything all day if we would have to do that. So of course, I truly believe that animal rights activists have the right arguments and have the right information. That someone misjudged their argument as being false or being untrue, they're not really to blame for that. It's just what happens. And I think what happened with me studying philosophy, I don't know exactly when it happened, but a couple of years ago, one of my uncles, who has an organic dairy farm, he decided that he no longer wanted to take the calves from the cow. So he decided to keep them with their mother for a couple of months. And just that one deed suddenly made me question, why are we actually taking calves away from their mothers? And is this actually justified? But I didn't decide for those questions to pop up in my mind. Those questions just popped up. It just happened. And I think that is how beliefs work. They change or they do not change. You can do things, you can inform yourselves, you can take an effort to question them, but you can't decide to change your beliefs. And I think realizing that, really truly realizing that, is eventually what really helped me to relate to my father, my meat-eating friends, and the rest of my family. Because it also makes really clear what is our job as vegan activists. I think as vegan activists, and this is also what I'm doing, we should encourage people to change their beliefs. We should inform them, but we can't expect them to change anything, because that is not in their control. It's not in our control, it's not even in their control, because you believe what you believe and you cannot make yourself believe anything else. Okay. I think, so the argument of Gideon Rosen, it's all very theoretical and analytical, but it really supported me to start thinking about, okay, what kind of non-culpable ignorance might be going on here that makes people do certain things? And it helped me especially because I know what my perspective once was on this image, on this practice. So although I was in a really bad place last year with my family, working on this argument, I actually wrote a thesis about it, really made me more open, more judgmental. And what happened as a result, that my family also started to be less defensive and more interested. And I'm really happy to tell you now that my mother, who also grew up on a dairy farm, is married to a dairy farmer, now became vegetarian. My 2 sisters became vegetarian in the last 2 months. And my sister persuaded her boyfriend to become vegetarian. And what is really cool, I think, is that my father became really a great vegan ally. He started to open up about what he doesn't like about his job. He started to talk to colleagues about how plant-based milk has a future. And I think, you know, he's still a dairy farmer, but all those small steps are really huge steps, knowing where they come from, what their perspective once was. Okay, so I want to conclude with some final advice. So, actually, I I think I don't want you to read this or to hear this as an encouragement to suppress your own emotions, to suppress your anger. I think anger is an emotion that is maybe not justified but totally understandable, and it points towards that you have a certain judgment about someone, and therefore it's really interesting to question that judgment. So instead of suppressing your anger and resentment, just notice it and start to question it. I think what a lot of vegans think when they see this, and what I was like in the beginning, like, how can they do this? How can anyone take a baby from his mother, put it in such a small hut, and leave it there for a couple of weeks and thinks that it's okay to feed them only twice a day? Like, how? How could they do this? But I think this question, how could they do this, we should stop asking it rhetorically. We should really start asking ourselves that. How can they do this? What are they believing that makes them do this? Because if we realize what those beliefs are, and if we start to kind of understand, we can meet them where they are. And we can create kind of a mutual understanding. So I think this is important, but also, I mean, this won't go right away. And I think when we do judge, that is also, in my opinion, a form of ignorance, and you shouldn't blame yourself for that. I mean, that would be contrary to what I am trying to show here. So the thing is, be forgiving towards yourself when you judge others, but also when you judge yourself. I heard a vegan say to me, well, I was vegan once before, and then I knew what was going on, but I went back to cheese anyway, and that was just such an asshole move. I was such a jerk back then. And I said to him, well, would you go back to cheese now? And he said, no, of course not. I said, okay, so then now you're realizing something that you didn't realize then. So in that way, I think also be mindful that although someone goes back to non-veganism or seems to be almost there but just not getting it, they don't have that realization that just happens without you having any real control over it. Like I said, you can question, you can inform, but you can't make yourself realize something. And you can't make others realize something. So I think, that's mainly my most important advice to you. Like, be forgiving. I think forgiving, I define it a little bit differently than most people. I think forgiving is actually going from judgment to non-judgment, seeing that your judgment wasn't really justified, and that you should just be more skeptical towards blame and be more, non-judgmental, basically. So thank you very much for your...